Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's Julie from the Story a Day podcast coming to you with the first post-May 2020 podcast. And how are you doing? There's a lot going on in the world. We have a couple of pandemics raging, one biological, one historical and social. They're flaring up and taking our attention. They are causing us stress and angst. We've also got all of the other things that we always have to deal with. We have our families, our friends, our jobs, economics. We have writing challenges. We have rejection and insecurity and acceptances and the highs and lows of all of that. Life continues to come at us. And coming out of the structure of a challenge like Story a Day May can sort of feel like slamming the brakes on when you are going at 60 miles an hour. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. I want to talk about the fact that you are not alone, that this is normal, that this doesn't mean anything. If you're feeling a little unmoored after the challenge, it doesn't really mean anything other than you're normal. So let's get started. Coming out of a challenge like this, it's a really, really common experience to come to a screeching halt and then to start berating yourself and say, but last month I was writing all the time. I wrote all these stories, even if you didn't write 31 stories. You know, if you wrote 15 in a month, if you wrote 4 stories in a month, that's still quite an achievement. And you were able to do it. And then you get into the next month and it tapers off. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I know you know this because you're a smart person, but it doesn't hurt to hear it. One is simply that you can't keep writing at that pace forever. That's the point of these challenges. The point of these challenges, like NaNoWriMo and Story a Day and any other of these monthly 30-day fitness challenges, everything, it's to prove to yourself that you can do the thing. If you sacrifice some other stuff in your life, you can make an incredible effort and an incredible progress in a short amount of time. But it's not necessarily how you want to live your life every day. You might have discovered that you love writing every day and that you love completing a thing every day. So maybe you're going to go forward and you're going to complete a scene in your novel or a flash fiction story or, almost every day of the week for the rest of the year. Maybe that's you. For most of us, that's not the case. And when we come out of the challenge, losing that structure gives us the ability, the permission, and frankly, the necessary space to slow down, take stock, and figure out what worked for us last month and what we're going to take going forward. Now, for some people, they've discovered during the past month that having a routine is super important to them. And maybe the routine will be to write every day. Maybe it won't be to write every day, but maybe it'll be that every weekday you get up and write at a certain time, or every weekend you write at a certain time. But now you have the freedom to make choices. You choose whether to make it every day. You choose how strict you're going to be about sticking to it, how many times you can take a Wednesday morning off, if it's on your schedule, before it becomes a problem. So you might have gone to that kind of routine where you're working less intensely than you did in May, but still want to keep some of that structure. I think the only thing that is less helpful than being too strict is not being strict enough. And I say this from a place of love because this is me. I'm very rebellious and I rebel against routine and I know it's good for me. So when I come to the end of these kinds of challenges, it's tough for me to keep going, to not go all the way the other way and say, well, I'm just not doing anything. I'm going to write when I feel like it. I'm going to get up and write at 8:30 if I feel like it. And of course, we all know how that goes. So have a think about things like that, about what you want to keep in terms of your routine from May, how strict you want to be with yourself, and how lax you want to be with yourself. I don't really advocate keeping going at the pace you were going in May. I don't think that you can keep churning out high quality creative work unless you take some time to take some things in. And you need to give yourself permission to do that. So you're not doing it in a kind of guilty, furtive way where you're sneaking off to read, or you're wishing you could go to an art gallery, or you're saying you're going to make time to watch a musical on TV and then never doing it because you feel guilty about the time. That's no, right? We need this stuff. It's really, really important to refill the well. So let's think about some ways that you can refill the well. There's tons of articles about this kind of thing at the storyaday.org website. Obviously, first step most writers go to is reading. If you're reading stuff like the stuff that you write, it can be really inspiring. It can also make you a little anxious for two reasons. One is that you feel like you'll never reach that level. And so that can cause you anxiety. It's not true because everybody's voice is different. Everybody's experiences are different. Whatever you write is unique. You're never going to write like Joyce Carol Oates. And that's a good thing, right? Because that's her thing. But you will write like you. So reading stuff like yours, if you write cozy mysteries and you want to go read a bunch of cozy mysteries and it inspires you, then go for it. If it's making you feel anxious, but you still love to read, you obviously will probably want to go and read stuff that's not like yours. There's two ways to do that. You can read stuff that you're not really enjoying, but you're studying. It's not so much of a break, but depending on your level of nerdiness, it can be a break. She says, as somebody who sat out on the porch for a couple of hours after a thunderstorm reading a book of the history of the 20th century, I am well qualified to talk about nerdiness. But the other thing that comes from reading stuff that's not like yours is if you read something that's totally not like anything you would write, but you enjoy it, that can also be inspiring and frees you from that sense that you're studying or that you are comparing yourself to the other writer. So ask around for recommendations from people you admire about books that transported them, that caught them up and just took them away from themselves for a couple of hours, and see about that. It's also important to do things that are non-story related. And if you think about it, I love going to see musicals and movies, and I love watching plays, and I love music, listening to musicals and things like that. But these things are all story related. And what do we do for our quote work? The thing that might be stressing you out, your writing, it's all story related. So if your break from story writing is to go and consume stories by other people, somewhere in your brain you're going to be parsing story structure and thinking about dialogue and thinking about description. So try and find some creative acts that are non-story related. I knit. You might want to make jewellery. You might want to garden. You might want to tinker with your car or build something. Break out the Lego and build that Death Star you've always wanted, or the Eiffel Tower, or some free-form engineering feat. If you have, I don't know, do people have Meccano anymore? It was this engineering stuff that we had when I was a kid. Anyway, do something non-story related. Just allow yourself to lose yourself in an act of creation that has nothing to do with words and nothing to do with stories. It's, even better if it's physical, because it's so different from writing at that point. It could be running or walking in nature, if you're allowed to walk in nature where you live. I mean, you can go out under a tree, right? And in the midst of a city, you can find a tree to sit under and stare up into its branches and just watch the patterns of the leaves that are blowing in the wind. That can be an act of creative rejuvenation. It is really, really important to get away from story. I think also if you like to read non-fiction, like I said, I was reading non-fiction the other day, that can be hugely important because it gives you new dots to connect. We know that creativity is the act of connecting dots in a way they haven't been connected before. And if you take in non-fiction real world examples of stuff. And then you can take those truths about the world and weave them into your story when you come back to your writing. Another thing that's very important is to take breaks. That's why Story a Day ends. It's why I don't tell you to go all month. And it's why I tell you during the month to write your story, get it finished, and then go take a break for the rest of the day. I don't tell you to go and work on your novel or, start planning for tomorrow's story. Just take a break and live. There is a scientist at MIT called Bob Posen who talks about this. I mean, people have studied this, right? We're not making it up. We don't have to invent this. People have done the dull, excruciating work of running multiple studies, analysing the data and going over and over it with their engineering and science brains. And they have told us that you need to take a 15-minute break after about 75 to 90 minutes of work. Our brains are not built for anything more than 90 minutes of work. According to Bob Posen from MIT, our brains have two modes when we're working. They have focus mode and they have learning mode. And so trying to do both, I think, I don't have a good definition of focus here, but I think learning mode is more about taking stuff in and focus is more about putting stuff out. And Posen says that learning happens better. We have much better retention if we are learning something, if we take a 15-minute break after a maximum of 75 to 90 minutes. In fact, they found the peak was 52 minutes. And obviously that's over a study which studied thousands of people. So you don't have to go and set a timer for 52 minutes. That might not be the right one for you. But understanding the principle that you can do intense work for a short amount of time relative to the day, and then you need to go and take a break. Not because you're weak, but because that's how our brains work. We need to give the brain some downtime to synthesize and gather stuff up, and you will retain stuff better and you will rejuvenate if you take a little 15-minute break. Posen says that we should do away with time as a metric of success. He's really writing for managers in businesses who are driving their employees to be there for 8, 9, 10 hours and be at their desk and do FaceTime and always be in person. And so this moment in time is going to be very interesting for supporting that kind of thing. I already know people in tech industries whose employees are, at the beginning of this working from home thing, were churning out way more work than they had been before when they worked in the office, in part because they're probably being forced to take breaks at home, and in part because they don't know how to take breaks. So they were working 12 hours for 15 hours a day because they didn't know how to walk away from their desks. So we're going to, but that's sort of analytics and work that isn't necessarily as creative. This was somebody specifically talking about an engineering type company. Not that there's not creative work in engineering, there is, but the idea that you need to be at your desk, pounding away at the keys, and that's somehow a measure of success is scientifically unsound. So please allow yourself to take some breaks. And that might mean at this point taking a break from writing for a few days. It might mean taking a break from a writing group that you've been in for a few days. You've been seeing these people intensely, or you've been, in this community intensely for a month. And if you need to walk away for a few days and see the other people in your life, that's fine. If you miss your June meeting of your writing group, just say, I'll be back, don't worry about it. But this month I'm doing other stuff. This is valid. You're not alone. If you want to do this, it's a very, very normal feeling. So, in summary, there's a lot going on in the world. There's probably a lot going on in your life. You've just come out of this intense month of writing where you learned a ton of stuff. If you haven't looked at the last post of Story a Day May yet, I encourage you to do that because I talk about the transition to normal life in that post. And there's some tools there for you. So that's at storyaday.org. Think about what you're going to do with your routine. Think about what worked, what you want to carry forward, what you want to let go of. And then think about how you can refill the well with things that are other than story-based. Sure, keep reading. Absolutely. Always keep reading. But don't feel guilty about taking time for other creative acts, for physical activity, for communing with people who are not writers. And when you do come back to your desk, remember that it's important to take breaks. We can push ourselves so hard that we end up not being productive. And other times, when we come back after a break, we are so hungry to write and we are so full of new ideas and new dots to connect that we can blast through that 90-minute session and look up blinking because the time has disappeared. That's what we want. We want that kind of writing, right? We don't want the hard slog writing. Sometimes you have to do the writing that's just, I've got to get through this scene, I've got to get through this story. But we're aiming for the days when it's a joy to write. So do away with time as a metric of success. This advice comes from MIT. These people know what they're talking about. You can set time. I'm not saying don't set a timer, but remember that you haven't failed if you get up. If you get up from your desk and take a break. That's what I have for you this week. Heading into June, a lot of us are thinking about revision. So there's a wealth of materials at storyaday.org about revision. I encourage you to go to the site, use that little search bar and have a look around. And the other thing I would mention is that this very week, our friends over at DIYMFA.com are running a summit, which means a huge collection of interviews with people in various parts of the writing world, people from everything from, my interview about ideas and how to work with them, to people talking about how to finish a novel, to people talking about how to get that novel ready to publish, and people talking about the publishing industry. The conversations are deep, and Gabriella's been doing this for a long time. She's had a podcast for years, and she ran the Writer's Digest podcast for a while. She's interviewed hundreds of authors and agents and editors, and she has really developed a knack for having a great conversation with creative people. And if you go over to the DIYMFA website and look for the summit, I put a note in the podcast links and you can go and listen to that, unless you're taking a complete break from the writing world for a couple of days, in which case ignore me. All right, that's what I have for you this week. I hope that you are feeling good. I hope that you're either writing or revising or taking a healthy break from all of the above. And I will speak to you soon when eventually I will ask you to keep writing. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week and, of course, keep writing.